Question is that the bill be now read a second time. Mr. Louis Song.
Sir, last year this House affirmed that climate change is a global emergency. This year, through another motion by the GPC for Sustainability and the Environment, this House called on the government to partner businesses and Singaporeans to make Singapore a low-carbon society. Since then, the government has responded clearly and positively. There was DPM Lawrence Wong's announcement last month that Singapore will aim to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Many of us have fought hard to have this ambitious target for many years now, and this was a topic I raised repeatedly and almost annually in this House. So in 2018, I said that DPM Lawrence Wong was my favourite minister. I'm happy to say now that with this latest net zero announcement by him, he remains my favourite minister. On a serious note, there is a reason Singapore's net zero target is such a big deal. Singapore's word is worth its weight in gold, and the world knows it. Today's bill is a testament to that fact. This bill raises carbon tax to the levels announced in this year's budget. I've always said carbon tax are our best weapon against climate change. The new rates sharpen this weapon and help Singapore achieve its net zero emissions goal. I have 3 points on how we can continue the push towards a low-carbon society. My first point is on companies in emissions-intensive trade-exposed EITE sectors. These sectors include the energy, chemical, and electronic sectors. This bill allows the government to grant allowances to companies in the EITE sectors. In its public consultation, the government said that these allowances are meant to help such companies manage the near-term impacts on business competitiveness and mitigate the risks of carbon leakage. I do understand that we need to remember the trade-offs. We want to push for climate change, but we don't want to push businesses away. But green groups are concerned, and rightly so. Every allowance erodes the coverage of our carbon tax and reduces the urgency to go green. Every allowance weakens the effectiveness of the carbon tax. I have 3 points to make on this. First, can ministers share how many companies currently belong to the EITE sector and will pay carbon taxes? In other words, how many companies are currently eligible for these allowances? Second, given that the allowances are meant to reduce the near-term impact on business competitiveness, why does the bill set no end date for such allowances to be granted? How will the government decide when to stop granting allowances? Will it consider committing to 2030 as a year by which it will stop granting allowances? It seems fair to say that the near term should last no longer than 8 years from today. Third, will the ministry consider making it practice to name all companies that receive such allowances from the government? There's no reason these names should be a secret. They are clearly not a matter of commercial sensitivity. And companies that do not receive such allowances will rightly wonder whether the government is secretly granting allowances to their rivals in the same sector. We must not let our carbon tax regime fall under such a cloud of suspicion. My second point today is on the coverage of our carbon tax. Our carbon tax, along with our transport fuel tax, currently covers 90% of our nation's emissions. This is a high proportion, but every percentage counts in the fight against climate change. At this year's budget debates, I asked the government to raise this percentage by lowering the carbon tax threshold to include smaller emitters that are reportable facilities. The ministry's position is that lowering the threshold would impose significant regulatory burden and cost on companies without any meaningful increase in coverage. Can ministers share how compliance costs would increase for a reportable facility to become a taxable facility? As I mentioned during the debate, operators of these facilities already have to pay the cost of tracking their emissions. So the only obvious new cost is just the tax itself. And it's precisely my point that they should pay this tax so that they have an incentive to cut their emissions. My third and final point today is on publicizing carbon tax data. I previously asked that the government publish more granular data on the impact of our carbon taxes, such as the trends in emission levels for tax facilities and the breakdown of revenue by facility type. The government answered by saying that company and facility-specific data was confidential information it could not disclose under our Carbon Pricing Act. To address this, I suggested that the government publish a ranking of top emitters without sharing exact emission levels. This would allow the public to make more informed consumption decisions without compromising business confidentiality. Minister Grace's response was that the ministry agrees with the need to provide strong impetus for companies to reduce emissions and will continue to study how we can spur this meaningfully. Can Minister share if it will now consider publishing a ranking of top emitters without the exact emissions levels? In addition, given that companies may now buy international carbon credits instead of pay carbon tax for up to 5% of taxable emissions, will the ministry also consider publishing data on trends in international carbon credits used by companies and facilities? In summary, I hope we can clarify and limit allowances granted to EITE companies, expand the carbon tax to all reportable facilities, and be more transparent with data on top emitters and international carbon credits. So we've done a lot in our battle to tackle climate change. Ultimately, we need to remember this quote. Quote, climate change is sometimes misunderstood as being about changes in the weather. In reality, it is about changes in our very way of life. Unquote. All of us need to change our mindset and our lifestyle. All of us have an important part to play. All of us need to work together. I thank all the activists, NGO, businesses, and our public officers for their passion, determination, and partnership in this important fight. In my opening speech for the climate change motion in 2021, I said, quote, I live this moment with sadness and optimism. Sadness because we are somehow fighting the same battle that our forefathers fought decades ago. But also optimism because we are now much clearer about what we can do. Optimism because Singaporeans, more than ever before, are speaking up and taking action, unquote. Unfortunately, the sadness continues as each day we see the effects of climate change right before our very eyes, and we feel this change. We see how it may be getting worse and that we're running out of time. The sadness and perhaps worry is fueled by what UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said just yesterday, quote, greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We're on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator, unquote. But, and it's a big but, I remain optimistic, and I hope we all do. There is so much progress made, so much more people joining this movement, and millions wanting to take action. Let's ride on this wave and this growing movement to ensure that we have a healthy planet to live in. So I stand in support of the bill.